Elvis Presley's twin brother was stillborn, a loss that haunted his family. His beloved mother died suddenly at age 46 while he was in the army. At the height of his fame, he was drafted and sent thousands of miles away from home and his career. Doctors found 14 different drugs in his system after his death at age 42. Number 10. Drafted into the army at his peak. Imagine being the biggest star on the planet. Your music is changing the world. Teenagers are screaming your name. You're making movies, and you're on top of the charts. That was Elvis Presley in 1957. He was a cultural phenomenon, a lightning rod for both adoration and controversy. He had purchased Graceland, a mansion in Memphis, Tennessee, providing a luxurious home for his parents Gladys and Vernon, something he had dreamed of doing since his impoverished childhood. His career trajectory seemed unstoppable, a rocket ship heading straight for the stratosphere of global superstardom. Then, on December 20th, 1957, just as this meteoric rise was solidifying, a letter arrived, serial number 53-310-761. It was his draft notice from the U.S. Army. The news sent shockwaves through his fan base and the entertainment industry. Why draft the king of rock and roll? Couldn't he serve in a special capacity, entertaining troops? There were indeed offers for him to join special services which would allow him to continue performing, albeit for military audiences. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, and Elvis himself made a crucial decision. He would serve as a regular soldier. No special treatment. The rationale was multifaceted. It could improve his public image, countering criticism that he was a rebellious influence, and show him as a patriotic American. Parker likely also saw it as a way to manage Elvis's career during a potentially difficult transition period, freezing his image as the young rocker while planning the next phase. On March 24, 1958, Elvis Presley reported for duty at the Memphis Draft Board. He was inducted at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and then sent to Fort Hood, Texas, for basic training. News cameras captured the moment he received his GI haircut, shearing off the famous locks and pompadour that were symbolic of his rebellious image. For Elvis, a young man incredibly close to his mother, and accustomed to the whirlwind of fame and the comfort of his inner circle, this was a jarring transition. He went from limousines and adoring crowds to barracks, fatigues, KP duty, kitchen patrol, and military discipline. He had to follow orders, live communally with strangers, and face the rigorous demands of Army life. Letters and interviews from the time reveal his homesickness and adjustment struggles, though he publicly maintained a positive attitude, determined to be seen as just another soldier. The separation from his music, his home, and especially his mother Gladys, weighed heavily on him. This period marked an abrupt, involuntary halt to a career that was moving at breakneck speed, forcing a fundamental shift in his life and planting seeds of change that would blossom, for better and worse, upon his return. The timing couldn't have felt more disruptive, plucked from the pinnacle of his world and placed into an entirely different, regimented reality. Number 9. Trapped in lackluster Hollywood movies. When Elvis returned from the Army in 1960, Colonel Tom Parker had a plan. The focus shifted dramatically from rebellious rock and roll to mainstream family entertainment, primarily through movies. Initially, this seemed like a promising direction. Films like G.I. Blues, 1960, and Blue Hawaii, 1961, were massive box office successes, accompanied by chart-topping soundtrack albums. These films presented a cleaned-up, charming, slightly scene-hided version of Elvis, palatable to a wider audience. The formula was simple: exotic locations or studio backlots pretending to be exotic. A handful of songs loosely tied to a flimsy plot, romantic interests, and Elvis as the thematic lead. However, what started as a successful strategy quickly devolved into a creative straitjacket. Parker negotiated lucrative multi-picture deals with studios like Paramount, MGM, and United Artists. These contracts often prebonetized quantity over quality, locking Elvis into churning out film after film, sometimes 3 per year. The scripts became increasingly formulaic, repetitive, and artistically uninspired. Titles like Kissin' Cousins, Harem Scarum, Plambake, and Paradise, Hawaiian Style, became synonymous with light, forgettable entertainment, a far cry from the raw energy of his early music or his initial dramatic aspirations. He had shown promise in films like King Creole, Before the Army. Elvis himself grew deeply frustrated with the material he was given. He longed for more serious roles, opportunities to stretch his acting abilities. He had admired actors like James Dean and Marlon Brando and hoped to follow a similar path. Instead, he found himself stuck singing often mediocre songs in nonsensical plots. He reportedly complained bitterly in private about the quality of the scripts and the direction his film career had taken. He felt creatively stifled, reduced to a caricature in travelogue-style musicals. Friends and colleagues noted his declining enthusiasm on set. While the movies continued to make money for a time, the artistic returns diminished significantly. The soundtracks, once major sellers, also began to feel repetitive and less inspired, often consisting of songs Elvis himself disliked. This period, spanning most of the 1960s, represents a significant artistic compromise. He was trapped by contracts his manager had made, forced to churn out work that failed to satisfy him creatively, watching his reputation as a serious artist erode while fulfilling contractual obligations. It was a golden cage, financially rewarding but artistically bankrupt, leaving him feeling disillusioned and disconnected from the ground-rending music that had made him famous. Number 8. The complex control of Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel Tom Parker, born Andreas Cornelis van Kujak in the Netherlands, became Elvis Presley's manager in 1956, guiding and controlling nearly every aspect of his career until Elvis's death. Parker was undeniably instrumental in launching Elvis into superstardom. He secured the national RCA Victor recording contract, arranged crucial television appearances, like those on The Ed Sullivan Show, and negotiated unprecedented deals that made Elvis the highest-paid entertainer in the world. Parker was a shrewd businessman, a carnival promoter at heart, who understood marketing and hype perhaps better than anyone in the business at the time. However, Parker's management style was also characterized by an extraordinary level of control, which often seemed to prioritize profit and Parker's own interests over Elvis's artistic growth or even personal well-being. Parker took an unusually high commission, typically reported as 25%, but sometimes rising to 50% on certain deals, far exceeding the industry standard. He tightly controlled Elvis's access, keeping him relatively isolated within his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, and limiting his interactions with other artists, industry figures, and sometimes even the press. Several key decisions made by Parker had profound and arguably detrimental long-term effects on Elvis's career and life. The relentless focus on cheap formulaic movies throughout the 1960s stifled Elvis's artistic ambitions. Parker famously turned down opportunities for Elvis to tour internationally, likely because Parker himself was an illegal immigrant without a passport and feared he wouldn't be allowed back into the U.S. if he traveled abroad. This decision cost Elvis the chance to connect with global audiences directly during his peak years and limited his cultural reach compared to contemporaries like the Beatles. Parker also reportedly discouraged Elvis from engaging with more challenging or contemporary musical material later in his career, preferring to stick with proven formulas. Even the demanding Las Vegas residencies, while initially successful, were structured under Parker's negotiations, locking Elvis into grueling schedules. Furthermore, Parker's influence extended into Elvis's personal life, vetting deals and managing finances in a way that left Elvis wealthy, but perhaps not as astronomically rich as his earning power suggested, given Parker's significant cut and sometimes questionable side deals involving merchandise. Parker maintained his grip even as Elvis's health declined, continuing to book demanding tours. While Parker undoubtedly secured Elvis's initial fame and fortune, his tight-fisted control, questionable financial practices, including alleged gambling debts influencing decisions, and resistance to artistic evolution or international exposure created a complex, often suffocating dynamic. It was a relationship built on loyalty and dependence, but also marked by decisions that arguably limited Elvis's potential and contributed to his isolation and frustration. Number 7. The divorce from Priscilla Bolie Presley. Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu in Bad Nauheim, Germany in September 1959 while he was stationed there with the U.S. Army. She was just 14 years old. He was 24. Despite the age difference and the unusual circumstances, a relationship blossomed. After Elvis returned to the States, he convinced Priscilla's parents to let her move to Memphis to finish high school, living initially with his father and stepmother before eventually moving into Graceland, under the promise that he would marry her. They finally married on May 1, 1967, in a small ceremony at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. Priscilla was 21, Elvis was 32. Their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born exactly 9 months later, on February 1, 1968. To the public, they were the picture of a fairy tale couple, the king of rock and roll and his beautiful young bride. However, the reality of their marriage was complex and strained from the beginning. Elvis's demanding career, constant touring, filming schedules, and the ever-present entourage created an environment that was difficult for a stable family life. Priscilla has spoken about the challenges of living within the bubble of Elvis's world, adapting to his nocturnal lifestyle, his moods, and the expectations placed upon her as Mrs. Elvis Presley. She felt she had to mold herself to his preferences, from her hair color and clothing style to her opinions. Elvis's well-documented infidelities during their marriage also took a toll. While he expected fidelity from Priscilla, he continued relationships with other women, particularly co-stars and backup singers, during his travels and movie shoots. The pressures of fame, Elvis's increasing reliance on prescription medication, and the fundamental challenges of maintaining intimacy and connection within their unique circumstances led to growing distance between them. Priscilla eventually began an affair with Mike Stone, her karate instructor, seeking connection and understanding outside the confines of Graceland. By late 1971 and early 1972, the marriage had effectively broken down. Priscilla decided she needed to leave to find her own identity. They separated on February 23, 1972, and Priscilla moved out of Graceland with Lisa Marie. The separation was reportedly painful for Elvis. Although their romantic relationship had ended, they maintained an amicable connection for the sake of their daughter. They were often photographed together after the separation, maintaining a friendly front. The divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973. They famously held hands as they left the Santa Monica courthouse. Despite the amicable nature of the legal proceedings, the end of his marriage represented a significant personal failure and loss for Elvis. It shattered the image of domestic stability he had perhaps hoped for, and marked another major upheaval in his personal life, contributing to feelings of loneliness and instability during his final years. Number 6. Saying goodbye to daily life with Lisa Marie. Lisa Marie Presley was born on February 1, 1968, the only child of Elvis and Priscilla Presley. From the moment she was born, she became the absolute center of Elvis's world when he was home at Graceland. Accounts from family and friends describe him as a doting, perhaps overly indulgent father. He showered her with gifts, ponies, golf carts, expensive toys, and cherished the time he spent with her. Graceland became her playground, and Elvis delighted in her presence, finding a source of unconditional love and normalcy amidst the chaos of his fame. Photos and home movies from this period captured tender moments between father and daughter. Elvis pushing her on a swing, riding bikes, or simply holding her close. When Elvis and Priscilla separated in February 1972, Lisa Marie was just 4 years old. Priscilla moved out of Graceland, taking Lisa Marie with her, primarily residing in California. While the separation and subsequent divorce finalized in October 1973 were handled amicably between Elvis and Priscilla, the physical separation from his daughter was a profound blow to Elvis. He went from having his child living under the same roof available for spontaneous moments of play and affection, to scheduled visitations and long periods of absence due to his touring and Las Vegas commitments, and her living primarily on the West Coast. Elvis made significant efforts to remain a constant presence in Lisa Marie's life, despite the distance. He arranged for her to visit Graceland frequently, often for extended stays during summers and holidays. When she was in Memphis, he would rearrange his schedule to spend time with her, renting out amusement parks like Liberty Land for her and her friends after hours, taking her on trips and continuing to lavish her with presents, including famously flying her on his private jet, the Lisa Marie, to see snow for the first time. He spoke to her often on the phone. However, the reality was that he was no longer part of her daily routine. He missed the everyday moments, waking her up, tucking her into bed each night, school events, the small day-to-day interactions that build the fabric of parent-child relationships. While their bond remained strong and filled with love during their time together, the separation imposed by the divorce meant that Elvis experienced fatherhood largely through scheduled visits and grand gestures rather than consistent, daily presence. For a man who valued family deeply and adored his daughter, this loss of everyday connection was a significant source of sadness. Friends noted that he missed Lisa Marie terribly when she wasn't around, and her absence contributed to the underlying loneliness that permeated his later years. The transition from having his daughter as a constant presence at Graceland to seeing her only periodically was a heartbreaking adjustment necessitated by the end of his marriage. Number 5. The grueling Las Vegas grind. After the success of his '68 comeback special, which revitalized his image and musical career, Elvis made a triumphant return to live performing. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, secured a lucrative deal for him to perform at the newly built International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton in Las Vegas. Elvis opened on July 31, 1969, to rave reviews and ecstatic audiences. His performances were electrifying, touting his powerful voice, charisma, and stage presence. He was backed by top-tier musicians, including James Burton on guitar and Ronnie Tutt on drums, the TCB Band, along with orchestras and backup singers like the Sweet Inspirations and the Imperials. This initial Vegas engagement marked a spectacular return to form and re-established him as a premier live performer. The success led to Parker negotiating long-term contracts, locking Elvis into performing month-long engagements, typically twice a year, usually February and August-September, with 2 shows per night, a dinner show and a midnight show, 7 days a week. Between 1969 and 1976, Elvis performed an astounding 636 consecutive, sold-out shows at the International Hilton Hotel. Initially, Elvis seemed energized by the Vegas shows. He enjoyed the connection with the live audience after years of sterile movie sets. The controlled environment of Las Vegas also suited Colonel Parker, making it easy to manage access and logistics. However, the relentless schedule eventually took a heavy toll, both physically and mentally. Performing 2 high-energy, hour-long shows every single night for weeks on end was incredibly demanding. The late hours disrupted any semblance of a normal sleep schedule, contributing to his reliance on medication to manage sleep and energy levels. Over time, the initial excitement waned, and the Vegas engagements started to feel like a repetitive grind. While he still had moments of brilliance on stage, there were also nights when his performance quality dipped, appearing tired, bloated, or going through the motions. He sometimes seemed bored, engaging in lengthy monologues or joking excessively with the band or audience, deviating from the planned setlist. The Vegas environment itself, with its emphasis on showbiz glamour and its isolating nature, also contributed to his issues. He was largely confined to his hotel suite between shows, surrounded only by his entourage. This golden cage existence exacerbated his dependency on prescription drugs and his detachment from the outside world. The pressure to maintain the image of the king, night after night, under the intense scrutiny of the Vegas spotlight, became an immense burden. What began as a triumphant comeback gradually transformed into a demanding, draining obligation that consumed large chunks of his final years, contributing significantly to his physical and mental exhaustion. The Vegas grind, while financially rewarding, ultimately became a symbol of the relentless pressures that characterized the later stages of his career. Number 4. The escalating begdy on prescription drugs. Elvis Presley's struggle with prescription drug dependency was not a sudden development, but a gradual descent that spanned many years, becoming increasingly severe in the final decade of his life. It appears to have started subtly, possibly even during his time in the army in Germany, where soldiers were sometimes given stimulants to stay alert during maneuvers and sedatives to help them sleep. Upon returning to the U.S. and resuming his demanding schedule of filmmaking and later intense touring and Las Vegas performances, his reliance on medication grew. He used stimulants, amphetamines like dextrine, to stay awake and maintain energy for late-night shows or long workdays, and then powerful sedatives and sleeping pills, barbiturates like Seconal Nambutal, and lighter drugs like Quaaludes and Valium, to wind down and combat chronic insomnia. He also took painkillers for various ailments, including back problems, stomach issues, irritable bowel syndrome, and dental pain. Over time, he developed a tolerance requiring larger doses to achieve the desired effects, leading to a dangerous cycle of polypharmacy, the simultaneous use of multiple drugs. Crucially, Elvis obtained these medications legally through prescriptions from various doctors. Dr. George Nichols, Dr. Nick, became his primary physician and traveled with him extensively. Dr. Nick later faced legal scrutiny regarding the sheer volume of drugs prescribed to Elvis, thousands of doses in the final years alone. Though he maintained he was trying to manage Elvis's complex health issues and control his intake, sometimes using placebos, Elvis reportedly believed these drugs were safe because they were prescribed by doctors and not illicit street drugs. He disliked the illegal drug culture and didn't see his own usage in the same light. However, the combination and quantity of drugs he was taking had devastating effects on his health and well-being. His dependency led to mood swings, slurred speech, impaired judgment, erratic behavior, and severe health problems, including an enlarged colon, liver damage, and high blood pressure. His physical appearance changed dramatically, marked by significant weight gain and bloating, particularly in his later years. His performances became increasingly erratic. Some shows were brilliant, while others saw him forgetting lyrics, rambling incoherently, or seeming barely able to stand. There were instances where concerts had to be canceled due to his health issues. Members of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, became increasingly concerned. Some tried to intervene or limit his access to drugs, but Elvis often resisted, becoming angry or finding other ways to obtain pills. His bodyguards, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, were fired in 1976 and subsequently wrote a tell-all book, Elvis, What Happened, published just before his death, detailing his drug use and volley for help. The escalating dependency trapped him in a cycle of needing drugs to perform, drugs to sleep, and drugs to cope with the side effects and the pressures of his life, ultimately leading to his premature death. It was a slow, tragic spiral fueled by access, enablement, and the immense pressures of sustaining an unparalleled level of fame. Number 3. The final years and visible health decline. The last few years of Elvis Presley's life, roughly from 1974 to his death in August 1977, were marked by a noticeable and often shocking physical decline, intertwined with his escalating prescription drug use and the relentless demands of touring and performing. The vibrant, energetic image of the king of rock and roll began to visibly erode. One of the most apparent changes was his significant weight gain. Once known for his lean physique and dynamic stage movements, Elvis became increasingly heavy, often appearing bloated and unwell. Custom-made jumpsuits, which had accentuated his physique in the early Vegas years, now struggled to contain his expanding waistline, sometimes splitting open on stage. This weight gain was likely due to a combination of factors, including poor diet, indulging in rich, high-calorie, Southern comfort food, lack of exercise, and the side effects of various medications, particularly corticosteroids, potentially prescribed for inflammatory condition. His concert performances during this period became increasingly unpredictable. While he could still deliver powerful vocals and connect with his audience on good nights, there were many shows where his declining health was painfully evident. Reports and recordings from these later concerts sometimes reveal him slurring his words, forgetting lyrics, relying heavily on backup singers, delivering rambling monologues, or appearing lethargic and short of breath. He sometimes needed to sit down during performances or lean heavily on his microphone stand or members of his entourage for support. There were several instances where concerts had to be cut short or canceled altogether due to his poor health, sometimes attributed publicly to fatigue or the flu. In Alexandria, Louisiana, March 1977, he was unable to finish a show, and similar incidents occurred in Baton Rouge and Baltimore. Beyond the stage, his overall health was deteriorating rapidly. He suffered from a range of serious ailments, many exacerbated or potentially caused by his chronic prescription drug abuse. Documented health issues included glaucoma, eye pressure, high blood pressure, an enlarged colon, megacolon, causing severe digestive problems, liver damage, and possibly the beginnings of heart disease. He often complained of fatigue, aches and pains. His sleep schedule remained erratic, relying heavily on sleeping pills to rest and stimulants to function. Despite these clear signs of ill health, the grueling tour schedule continued, pushed by management commitments and perhaps Elvis's own need to perform or inability to stop. The contrast between the legendary image and the reality of the ailing man on stage became increasingly stark and poignant. Photos and footage from these final years often depict a man looking much older than his early 40s, his eyes sometimes glassy, his face puffy, a shadow of the electrifying performer he once was. This visible decline was a heart-breaking spectacle for fans and a source of deep concern for those close to him, painting a picture of a man trapped by his fame and battling serious health demons in the public eye. His final concert took place in Indianapolis on June 26, 1977. He appeared overweight and unwell, but delivered a passionate performance, ending, as always, with "Can't Help Falling in Love." Less than 2 months later, he was gone. Number 2. The devastating loss of his mother, Gladys. Gladys "Love" Smith Presley was the center of Elvis's universe. Their bond was exceptionally close, often described as intense and deeply devoted. Elvis was her only surviving child, his twin brother, Jesse Garin, having been stillborn, and she was fiercely protective of him throughout his childhood and rise to fame. Growing up in poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later Memphis, Tennessee, the Presley family, Elvis, Gladys, and his father Vernon formed a tight-knit unit, but the connection between mother and son was particularly strong. Elvis affectionately called her by pet names, including Satnine, and relied heavily on her emotional support and approval. He often said his primary motivation for seeking success was to provide a better life for her and lift his family out of poverty. Buying Graceland in 1957 was largely a gift for her, a symbol of his devotion and success. In the summer of 1958, while Elvis was on leave from basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, Gladys fell seriously ill. She had been struggling with her health for some time, possibly exacerbated by stress, dietary changes that came with newfound wealth, and reportedly her own struggles with diet pills and perhaps alcohol to cope with her son's fame and absences. Her condition worsened rapidly, and she was diagnosed with acute hepatitis. Elvis obtained emergency leave from the Army and rushed back to Memphis, staying by her bedside at Methodist Hospital. Despite doctors' efforts, Gladys Presley died on August 14, 1958, at the young age of 46. Elvis was absolutely devastated. Those present described him as inconsolable, overcome with grief. At her funeral, held at Graceland and then the Memphis Funeral Home, he reportedly wept uncontrollably, leaned over her casket and cried out things like, "Oh God, everything I have is gone," and "Goodbye, darling. Goodbye. I love you so much. I lived my life for you." He talked to her as if she could hear him, expressing his anguish at losing his best girl. Photos from the funeral capture his raw grief, a stark contrast to his public image as the confident king of rock and roll. Gladys's death occurred at a pivotal moment in Elvis's life. He was just 23, serving in the army far from home and at the peak of his initial fame. Losing her removed his primary emotional anchor. Many friends and observers noted a profound change in Elvis after her death. Some believe he never fully recovered from the loss, carrying that grief with him for the rest of his life. It arguably marked the end of his youth and innocence. He returned to Fort Hood shortly after the funeral and was shipped out to Germany a few weeks later, facing the rest of his army service and the future without his mother's guidance and unwavering support. He kept her room at Graceland, preserved much as she had left it. The premature death of Gladys Presley was arguably the most significant personal tragedy Elvis ever experienced, a wound that deeply impacted his emotional landscape and shadowed the remainder of his life and career. Number 1. The stillborn twin brother. In the early morning hours of January 8, 1935, in a small two-room shotgun shack built by her husband and brother-in-law in East Tupelo, Mississippi, Gladys Presley gave birth to identical twin boys. The first boy, named Jesse Garon Presley, was tragically stillborn, delivered about 30 minutes before his brother. The second boy, healthy and crying, was named Elvis Aaron Presley. Vernon Presley, their father, recorded the names and birth order in the family Bible. The loss of Jesse Garon cast a long shadow over the Presley family, particularly over Gladys, and inevitably shaped the environment in which Elvis grew up. In the impoverished South of the 1930s, infant mortality was tragically common, but the loss of a child, especially a twin, remained a profound grief. Gladys was known to speak often of Jesse, sometimes expressing a feeling that a part of Elvis was missing, or that Elvis had the strength of two boys. This sense of loss of an absent sibling became part of the family narrative. Elvis grew up acutely aware that he was a twin whose brother had not survived. While Elvis rarely spoke publicly about Jesse Garon, the knowledge of his stillborn twin is believed by many biographers and friends to have had a deep psychological impact on him throughout his life. Some have suggested it contributed to feelings of survivor's guilt, a sense of incompleteness, or a profound underlying loneliness, a feeling that someone essential was missing from his life. He reportedly visited his brother's unmarked grave. Jesse was buried in an unmarked grave in Priceville Cemetery, near Tupelo, during return trips to his birthplace. The fact that he was given the middle name Aaron, sometimes spelled Aaron, the spelling on his birth certificate and gravestone, while Jesse was given the middle name Garon, created a rhyming pair, forever linking them. This primal loss, experienced at the very moment of his birth, can be seen as the first heartbreak in Elvis Presley's biography. It represents a fundamental absence, a relationship that never was, a mirror image lost before it could be seen. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the existence and death of Jesse Garon were foundational elements of Elvis's identity. It speaks to a sense of solitude that perhaps even the adoration of millions could never fully erase. Being the surviving twin in a family that deeply felt the loss created a unique emotional context for his upbringing, embedding a note of sorrow and what might have been into the very beginning of his story. The knowledge that he started life alongside another only to enter the world alone is a poignant and heartbreaking fact that deuced the personal tragedies woven into the fabric of his extraordinary life.